So that system is a so-called chademo. In Japanese, the meaning has the charging, chademo, charging and moving. And also, that's a Japanese wording. Cha is tea or coffee. Demo means, why don't you spend only 10 or 15 minutes for the drinking the tea or coffee? Only 10 or 15 minutes. Again, not only people, also I have some feeling if I face something new. So I'm compare with previous one, current one. But if so, we cannot have any change or moving. So the moving need something, so strong willingness. So I don't want to force everything to endure. So we will do our best effort to longer distance. But again, in one day or 1 year, we cannot solve all the problem. So the Mitsubishi case, we think that volume is more necessary. Volume is not a business viewpoint. So in order to minimize the cost and in order to popularizing the vehicle, so first of all, we have to show the people how utilize the EV. So on the business aspect, those two guys is a really rival on the business view. But the partnership or the popularizing the EV, we are the real partner. So without having the vehicle, we cannot expect the installation of a quick charger, so many. So together with them, we will create new world of the EV. That's our stance. So again, not fully answering really the current distance. I can say that not enough for everybody, but there might be some solution by other way. So for next generation. Sorry, that's my question.
Thank you.
I 100% agree with that. We are partners but not competitors in this moment, because that's what we always say to ourselves, and even we say to the media, because the market is very big. We have to create it together. It's not time. It's not the right time for us to fighting with each other. And this moment might be in the future. Vivian just mentioned that cruising mode. Actually, cruising mode, in our point of view, is not a right word for that. Because usually before, I take China market to be an example. It's a very good example. Before, when the market don't have a very strict regulation to compete with each other, all the car makers saying that our cruising range, cruising fuel consumption is around like 4 liters per 100 kilometers, even 3 liters per 100 kilometers. Cruising, that means average speed, continuously going. So nowadays we're talking about urban range or something. Sometimes we talk about combined range. That means in different road conditions. Fortunately, before we have a very good standard. In Japan, they call it 10-15. And in Europe, they call it 15 conditions. In Europe, they call it 105 conditions. In China, they call it 15 conditions. Actually, it's the same thing. It's the same standard. It's about whole system to testing the car in different climbing up the hill or going down, taking brakes, start, for different road conditions. But we find out this standard actually is not quite good for pure electric vehicle. So maybe it's another thing in the future. The pure electric vehicle could have the testing standard for how long it can go for. Just like nowadays in America, they always talking about how much mile per gallon, or in China we're talking about how much liter per 100 kilometers. They all have a standard for that. And besides that, actually our range is the longest one, comparing with them. Oh, sorry.
So is the fight beginning now? Is that?
Sorry for that, but because we are designing originally for taxi, so we have a very big battery. We have the 60 kilowatt battery, almost 3 times bigger. And so for the even we have the least battery as a battery company oriented, we don't think our technology for the energy density eventually can be improved. We don't think our car can go for 500 kilometers eventually. It's hard. It's very hard. But we can try to decrease the cost of the battery, but we can't increase the range of the car eventually. So maybe we think it's better to promote this idea to change the people's consuming habits eventually, or even like Better Place is sitting here, like the switchable battery idea. But generally saying that in urban, as we test in Shenzhen, for different driving habit, we can go further to 250 to 300 kilometers with full air conditioning, with different urban road condition. So our bottom line is 250, because every taxi in the run for 500 kilometers per day, we need to be at least 250 to make them charge only twice per day. But of course, if we can go for 500 kilometers, that's excellent. But at this moment, we can't. So we believe that also the government, even for a car maker like us, we can be together trying to educate, to change the people's mind, to tell them that what's the battery trade, what's the future technology development. It could not just waiting there to say, oh, I will wait for the car can go for longer. I wait for the car can go for 500 kilometers, and then I'm going to buy a pure electric vehicle. Because we don't think it have that day. The people have to think, oh, the technology is good enough nowadays.
I think important point here would be cruising range and, of course, the charging frequency. You know, how often you have to recharge your car, I think is an important parameter for planning of infrastructure. Say if, you know, well, the customers, the consumers are being educated, they take it. But practically, if they need to recharge the car often, then other than, you know, recharging it back home or during office time, then perhaps we have to set up more charging points, you know, in the city to facilitate recharging just in case of emergency or whatnot. So I think this is the very point that I'm driving at.
Thank you, Vivian. I think that's a very relevant point because, yeah, in terms of planning and infrastructure, that's really critical. But going back to Mr. Edwards' comments yesterday about limited range and his anxiety, that is typical answer you get from most customers when we do focus groups. This is why we have the term range anxiety, because customers are just paranoid about the fact that they're driving somewhere and they're stuck without, you know, with a drained out battery. And so this is range anxiety, but I think from an industry standpoint, I think we're getting a bit hung up about range right now because the reality of it is you don't need, you know, beyond 160 kilometers on a day-to-day basis. I mean, how many of you wake up in the morning and on a lark decide to drive and beyond 160 kilometers? It doesn't happen that often. I mean, it probably does happen with some individuals. I'm probably not one of those, but it does, you know, there is no real need. So going back to a story, I spoke to one of a professor, a sort of academic on this before, and he gave me a beautiful analogy. He talked about cell phones. You know, it's most of the time, you know, you sort of by behavior, right? You go home, you plug it in, or if you're at the office, you plug it in. How many of you use a public phone in the last, say, 24 hours? How many of you done so? No, right? Oh, you have? Okay, but it's there because you have that safety net to know that, you know, in your public place, like if for some reason, you know, you lose your purse or you dropped it into, you know, a puddle or whatever, and it doesn't work, you want to have that safety to know that there are public cell phones that you can use. So it's the same thing about, I think Aoki-san mentioned it from TEPCO yesterday about this psychological barrier that when you see it so 50% range, you're like, oh, I have to stop driving. But that is not the case. I mean, so the professor was talking to me gave me a good theory. He was saying, like, you know, like a placebo, right? If you put dummy chargers around the city, do you think that's going to encourage people to drive more? I think so, but you know, of course, cities can't do that and go around duping citizens with dummy chargers. So it goes back to Vivian's point about planning. It's important. But at the same time, I think EV is all about behavioral change, about educating people. And let's not forget, we are all three of us, my colleagues here, we are all in OEM. So we also sell ICE cars. EV is not going to displace the ICE car in the near term. That's not going to happen. I mean, we looked at the most positive scenario is 10% of the TIV in 2020. So 90% still will be ICE cars. So it doesn't mean that you have no alternative. So which is why we talked about in Japan, where you can go, if you weekend, you want a minivan, you can go hire one, you can set up your own community car sharing, which is something that we're seeing picking up quite a lot in Japan and even in Europe. So I think those kind of communal mobility, and it goes back to Robert, you mentioned it about us trying to hijack the agenda with EV. It's not through our device, honestly, but it's good to know that there's a shared agenda in these 2 days of discussion where we feel that EV can be part of the solution. It's just one piece of the solution. It's not the end-all solution here. I mean, we've still got fuel cell technologies to go into. That's, you know, that's the next step. But EV needs to work in concert as a small piece of the whole mobility. So you talk about public transport, you know, low carbon solution transport. So public transport, you know, EV solutions, whether it's buses or other kind of electric trams. So it needs to be part of the overall mobility solution. It's not the end game. It's not the, you know, it's not all. So I think we need to get back to the reality of the situation right now. So what we need in the beginning is just to get enough people to understand EV is a good choice for the environment and also for the purse, for the pockets. And hopefully drive a sort of a beginning of a transformation, a new way of looking at mobility, sort of a paradigm shift, which is why, you know, this is sort of what we're saying, sort of shifting the way you move, which is in many ways can be radical, but I think with small steps we can get there. So that's my 2 cents worth on it.